was able to locate the shooter who was deceased. We're going to be working this investigation shoulder to shoulder with our federal partners. The FBI is on scene, and right now I'm going to introduce you to the SAC of the Dallas Field Division, FBI Joe Rumrock.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Joe Rothrock. I'm a special agent in charge of the Dallas FBI Field Office. I want to first start by thanking our partners in local law enforcement, specifically the Dallas Police Department, for their quick and timely response. I can confirm at this time that the FBI is investigating this incident as an act of targeted violence. It is unfortunately just the most recent example we've seen of targeted violence. To include here in North Texas, where back on July 4th, we saw a coordinated attack carried out against an immigration detention center in Alvarado, Texas. What I can also share with you is that early evidence that we've seen from rounds that were found near the suspected shooter contain messages that are anti-ICE in nature. Again, this is just the most recent example of this type of attack. This will be a whole of government response. There will be no resource not utilized to bring all those individuals who are responsible to bring them to justice and to hold them accountable. While we're not releasing identities of any victims at this time, what I can confirm for you is no members of law enforcement were hurt during this attack. If any member of the public has information that would help the FBI's investigation, I would ask that you please report that to 1-800-CALL-FBI. Again, any piece of information will be helpful, but this will be an ongoing investigation between us, a number of federal partners, and our local partners, again, to ensure that anyone responsible is held accountable. With that, I will turn it over to my counterpart from the ICE Enforcement and Removal Office.
Good morning. My name is Joshua Johnson. I'm the acting field office director for ICE Dallas. I'll be brief with my comments, but I do want to start off by saying thank you to the Dallas Police Department, Dallas FBI, HSI, CBP, ATF, and virtually every law enforcement officer in North Texas for your support. This is the second time I've had to stand in front of you and talk about shooter. One of my facilities, FBI, I think that HSI, CBP, ATF, is that the red has to stop. Virtually every law enforcement officer in North Texas for support. We're seeing what is being placed online. People coming in and doing acts of violence against ICE employees. So that's kind of all I have for today, is that it's just gotta stop. It's dangerous. People are losing their lives. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Again, thank you all so much. As it was said here today, if you do have any information, reach out to 1-800-CALL-FBI. Thank you. Thank you.
This needs to stop. Violence is wrong. Politically motivated violence is wrong. It was 2 weeks ago today that we saw a political assassination in Utah that tore the heart out of much of this country. This is the third shooting in Texas directed at ICE or CBP. This must stop. To every politician who is using rhetoric demonizing ICE and demonizing CBP, stop. To every politician demanding that ICE agents be doxxed and calling for people to go after their families, stop. This has very real consequences. Look, in America, we disagree. That's fine. That's the democratic process. But your political opponents are not Nazis. We need to learn to work together without demonizing each other, without attacking each other. And I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to the brave men and women of law enforcement. I want to say thank you to the brave men and women of ICE and CBP and everyone who puts their lives on the line to keep us safe. The divisive rhetoric tragically has real consequences. I hope that every one of us will pray, number one, for the safety of law enforcement that are risking their lives to keep us safe. Number two, for the health of those who were shot and injured today. We still don't know the full details of who was injured, but for the families also of the victims of this shooting. Violence has no place. It is wrong. And we should come together. If we want to have a debate about immigration policies, we could do so in the halls of Congress without demonizing each other, and especially without demonizing the men and women who every day put on a badge and go risk their lives to keep us safe. And we should not be putting language out there that inspires madmen to commit evil crimes. Our prayers are with the men and women of law enforcement, and we ought to come together and have some decency across the political aisle to say this violence is wrong and it needs to stop.
Senator, have you been told that immigrants detainees are the victims of today's shooting?
My understanding is the details of who the victims are still being ascertained, so I don't want to go ahead of law enforcement releasing these details. What they have said is that no law enforcement was injured, and so that's a natural inference, but I don't know the details.
So I'm not gonna go into any more details at this time. We will come back to you when we have more details to share. Again, our goal here will be transparency as those details become available. But we are still in the early stages of an investigation. Information is still coming in. When we have more details, we will come back to this group. I'm not gonna be identifying victims at this time. The only thing I will confirm at this time is no law enforcement was injured. Certainly, you can respect law enforcement's need to make notifications. At this point in time, we're not gonna take any additional questions from law enforcement. Again, I'd like to ask for you to respect the fact that this is an ongoing investigation. And as more details come available,
We're not asking for the victims.
I understand.
In general sense,
I will,
the victims are the detainees.
the only thing I can say right now is that no law enforcement was injured this morning as part of the attack. I won't be taking any more questions, neither will law enforcement this time. We'll come back to you later today or the coming days when I have additional information. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.
All right, so we were just listening to officials there in Dallas. They didn't want to go so far as to identify who these victims are. We know 4 people were shot, 2 transported to the hospital. 1 victim died, and the suspect, the shooter there, is dead. Additionally, officials are calling this an act of targeted violence and said early evidence shows that on the rounds near the shooter, that there were messages that were anti-ICE in nature. They also said that no ICE officials were killed in this shooting. I want to go to our chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, John Miller. What stood out to you from that press conference, John?
Well, the FBI's statement that this was an act of targeted violence, and that statement being based on messages being written on the shell casings found near the shooter, who we are told took his own life after the shooting, gives us some now direction as to motive, anti-ICE messages. We also heard from the ICE official who, making a turn, said, referring to the July 4th shooting you and I were talking about a short time ago, at another ICE location from an individual who fired from on the ground, that the rhetoric has to stop. He said, it just has to stop. There is no secret, given the events of the last couple of weeks, that we are in a very brittle time in terms of politics, in terms of rhetoric, and in terms of violence. What we now are hearing from people briefed on this investigation is the following, which is this was a busy morning. Prior to 7 a.m., teams that have been out executing arrests in the early morning hours are coming back in with detainees to this facility. And that one of these, a van, not a van, we are told, from ICE, but from another agency, another federal agency that was out making arrests on behalf of ICE, is approaching that location. and that suddenly, from an elevated location, someone opens fire on that van. Now, Pam, you know these vans. We've seen them before at federal facilities. Typically, these are vans that have tinted windows, so you can't see whether they're occupied or who they're occupied by. I would suspect that that's probably the case in this instance. When someone opened fire on the van, whether they were aiming for the driver or the person in the passenger seat, or they believed that the van might have contained federal agents, but weren't able to see. They were, according to the FBI, believed to be targeting federal law enforcement officers when they opened fire. So that is starting to come together with a slightly more granular picture. In that instance, an assault on federal officers, even if that was just the intent, would be an investigation where the FBI would be taking the lead. What we are told, though, is that the people who were wounded and one who was killed were not law enforcement officers, not ICE officers. So it is likely that they were people who had been picked up by those agents this morning and were being brought into that detention facility.
What do you make of Governor Abbott calling this an assassination?
Well, I think if you parse that, what Governor Abbott seems to suggest is that it was an attempt to assassinate federal agents by someone with anti-ICE motivation who ended up killing people who were not his target, but the intent is becoming clearer.
All right, I'm going to bring in our CNN senior national correspondent, Ed Lavandera. Ed, you were there at that press conference. What's the latest there?
Well, I think what stood out the most is the law enforcement agencies, the federal and local, going to great lengths not to really kind of give any clear information at this point as to who the victims might be, and leaving it kind of as an open question as to whether or not it was officially the detainees, excuse me. But I can, tell you in that area around that ICE facility where this appears to have taken place is not an area that the general public would have access to. So at this point, without authorities officially saying that it was detainees who are the victims of today's shooting, leaves still, at least for the moment and time being, a great deal of speculation as to who exactly the victims are, other than the law enforcement saying that it was not an ICE agent or any other law enforcement that was injured or killed in today's attack. So why they are hesitant to put that information out there officially just yet wasn't exactly clear from what we heard just moments ago. And I tried to ask several of the officers as they were leaving the stage there to try to clarify all of that, and they simply just walked away. So we will continue trying to pour through that, but I think it does raise a lot of questions as to these areas surrounding these types of facilities. Clearly, from what we've been able to gather from law enforcement officials so far this morning, is that the shooter was able to reach an elevated position and get a line of view into the facility where these detainees and these ICE agents work here, just along the edge of Interstate 35 in Dallas. Kamala?
All right, and on that note, I want to bring in our CNN correspondent Priscilla Alvarez, because Priscilla, you've been talking to your sources and you've learned that the suspect here was a sniper that was on an elevated space of some sort.
Well, a Homeland Security official saying that the person did shoot from an elevated position. We had heard earlier from the Dallas police that they had shot from an adjacent building to this ICE facility. And now we're also seeing comments from the FBI director, who has posted images of the bullets that we heard about briefly there at the press conference. You see it there. It says, quote, anti-ICE, and the director also says, quote, while the investigation is ongoing, an initial review of the evidence shows an ideological motive behind this attack. Now, earlier in the morning, active director Todd Lyons on CNN had spoken about the ramped up attacks and threats on ICE around the country. Also discussed, or the Department of Homeland Security has also noted that this facility was one that was targeted with a bomb threat in late August. But even so, there continue to be questions about the motive. We know, for example, that at least 2 of those who were shot were detainees. And this leads me to sort of the context with this particular facility. This is a facility where immigrants are taken to be processed. There are about 3 or 4 holding rooms there, and generally a couple dozen people there at any given time before they are later transferred to a detention center for continued holding. And I spoke only moments ago with an immigration attorney who is based in